This piece is called A Dream of Society as Flawless as Diamond, and it's actually quite an early work. I did it a while ago when I was finishing my degree, and it's sort of the seed of a lot of the molecular work that I do now. And the inspiration of it was the structure of diamonds, and so each of these men represents a carbon atom, and carbon in diamond is connected to 4 other carbon atoms around it, forming what's called a tetrahedral lattice. These are little tetrahedrons. Carbon's are sort of hardest natural material known, and it's often called the perfect crystal as well. And at the time, the inspiration was, I'd been rereading James Lovelock's theory of Gaia, and the idea of us all being interconnected and dependent on each other. And it just seems such a sort of simple repeat. It's really very simple because it's just one man repeated, but to express a lot of my sort of thoughts on the idea that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants and we're all interconnected, and but it has a sort of joyfulness about it as well. A lot of people think it looks like dancers or acrobats, which is sort of interesting, different take. I can't really remember how old I was when I first discovered about the DNA molecule and Watson and Crick's discovery of it, but I do have a recollection of being really amazed and in wonder at the sort of elegance and simplicity of nature's solution to this quandary of how was genetic material passed on. And it hasn't ceased to cause me pleasure, really, I guess, the elegance of DNA. I've reproduced the 10 base pairs of the DNA molecule, and every single atom is represented by a human figure. It's a sort of code I'd developed over time, whereby the carbons are little men with both arms and legs outstretched, which enables them to form 4 bonds to the adjacent atoms. Oxygen is a small female who has 2 arms because oxygen forms 2 bonds. There are little white children that are all the hydrogens. At the moment I'm making little armatures for a small female figure, which is my oxygen atom. This I made by hand. I've got a mould of it. I'm going to cast a couple more and then I'll change them so that they look nearly the same. They'll be recognisably the same, but then they're slightly different depending on what other atom they interact with. Carbon-oxygen double bonds need to be sculpted separately because the angles of the bonds in a double bond are slightly different from in a singly bonded element. Part of the DNA molecule I'm working on has a phosphate sugar backbone, and so I'm going to sculpt separately the oxygens that are involved in the phosphate group. So it's going to have a couple of small female figures. I'm leaving extra copper wire, armature wire, at the end of the arms, because then that allows me to attach the different figures together in my bonded atoms. Hopefully it's hot enough. Almost, but not quite. We've lost a little bit around the knees on that one. So actually not bad. It's really just the knee area that would need to be patched. But the arms have all come out okay. That's it, mostly patched. Then it's a sort of slow process I work on slowly, just refining the forms and making it sculpting. Obviously sculpting a figure, but at very small dimensions, which are very forgiving. If you wanted to scale this up, you need to do an awful lot more work for it to be. But it works. They work. They're very believable at a small scale. You don't have to be. You have inaccuracies, slight inaccuracies, and the the anatomy, and almost, I mean, I play with the anatomy, I push it. A lot of these people wouldn't. They've all got quite long arms and short legs, but they kind of work. I mean, if you look at a lot of figurative sculpture anyway, a lot of the positions, they've got to look believable to the eye. They're not always possible. Michelangelo's dawn and dusk marble sculptures have far too big a twist, but it doesn't look awkward, and you can have things that are perfectly possible anatomically but then just look wrong. That so at the end of the day, it's all about looking and trying to look with fresh eyes and work out whether it works, whether it's believable or not. I've got on my sketchbook here the cytosine guanine. These are the base pairs in DNA, and this is going to be, I'm drawing up adenine thymine at the moment. And I've got my little template here which has the bond angle. It's just got a 120-degree bond angle. And I've got drawn on here my different lengths of bonds. So it just sort of, that was a nitrogen-carbon double bond. This is a carbon-nitrogen single bond, which is a bit longer. In my little set of atoms and elements I've created, I've got an average length. So a carbon-nitrogen double bond will be a particular length on average. But in DNA, the actual molecule, different bonds will be of different lengths depending on some of the stresses and strains and how the molecule, how the atoms just fit together. And I don't want to change the lengths for each different bond because that will, it needs to be a bit simplified and idealistic. But it'll probably work out okay because the bonds figures are quite good. Once you've cast them, if the angles aren't quite right, you can just slightly adjust them to get them all meeting up together. But this is kind of going to be the template for the guys in the foundry to kind of get it together. Here we have a carbon-nitrogen double bond. That will go like that. And here I have a carbon-carbon. So that and that will fit like that. So you start to get the and this bit of the DNA is quite nice because it's all planar, so as long as it's just in 2 dimensions, we've got to get it all working nicely. Then there'll be another one of these there. And then up here we have nitrogen on its own, and then these are hydrogens. We'll have a couple of little hydrogens there, and that the other way around, whatever. Kind of works visually as well. Start to get, and then over here we'll have a carbon-oxygen double bond, like this. That's the beginning of the sort of DNA base. I can sort of begin to visualise it. And so we're going to have these as like the rungs of the ladder of the DNA, all made out of the figures. And then we've got the backbone, which comes up in 3 dimensions. And these, I'm going to have 10 of these base pairs stacking one on top of each other. And the whole piece, based on this size, is going to be about 1 metre by 1.70 meters, the whole, which is quite a feat I'm undertaking. Hopefully it will all work out and we'll get there in the end. The whole DNA helix is made of just 5 atoms. You've got carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen and phosphorus. But when I was making the elements that would go together to make the sculpture, I needed to create as separate individual units the double bonds. So as well as we have the 4 individual atoms that I've made, then in addition we've got 4 different double bonds. So a carbon-carbon double bond, a carbon-nitrogen double bond, a carbon-oxygen double bond, and then the phosphorus-oxygen double bond. I didn't have to create the phosphorus individually because it only exists with a double bond. So this is my DNA Helix of Life. The sculpture is formed of base pairs that forms almost like the rungs of the ladder that rotate round. If you consider the whole helix as a sort of twisted ladder, and the base pairs are adenine, cytosine, thymine and guanine, which are the 4 letters of the DNA alphabet. And this is the beginning of the gene for hemoglobin, which was one of the first genes to be sequenced. And the base pairs run across, and then around the outside is the sugar phosphate backbone. So it's sugars and phosphates in series that hold the molecule together. And the way DNA works, which is so amazing, is that the ladder can sort of unzip like 2 pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and free floating base pairs can come in and lock in and replicate both strands. This is the CG pair, cytosine and guanine, and across between the 2 bases you have 3 hydrogen bonds, and this is the place where, when the DNA unzips, these bonds, which are weak bonds, break and allow the 2 strands of DNA to separate, so that by unzipping and then joining up with the right base pairs that will fit, you then get 2 copies. And this is the most important fundamental aspect of DNA, which has enabled genetic life to exist.